Welcome to Rise and Rouse, a podcast for people who give a damn. This is the very first episode of the podcast, and I am so very excited to be kicking off with all of you. This is your host, Erin Arquitt. I'm a social impact strategist, consultant, and plant lover. It's true, I have more than 50 plants in my apartment, and my partner is continually trying to talk me down from buying more. And that leads me into my first guest. This week on Rise and Rouse, you'll hear my conversation with Janie Arquitt of Pantry Posies, a social enterprise committed to bringing flowers to food pantries. We talk about how beauty isn't a luxury, but actually an integral part of the human experience, and how everyone deserves dignity and respect. It actually reminds me of the old saying from the beginning of the labor movement. We want bread and roses too. Janie finds hope in bringing joy to others, and I hope you will feel inspired listening to her story. I'm so excited to be joined today by Janie Arquitt, who is an amazing friend of mine. I met her a while ago on a project I was working on around gleaning in the North Country of New Hampshire. And we've just become like very, very good friends since that. And I'm so grateful that we've been able to stay in touch and be friends and to be able to stay in each other's orbit. Janie had actually left Boston area and a career in clinical care for an avenue more focused in community care with a hope to incorporate her lifelong passion for flowers. So after becoming involved with local food pantries and food access work in her new home in the mountain region of New Hampshire, she crafted a new path, one that could blend these things together by providing ethically grown bouquets to the patrons of local food pantries. This idea that you have, this work that you're doing right now, I think is just so very, very important and so interesting. And I'm so very excited to hear a little bit more about that today. And I know other folks are going to be excited too. So I'm going to just stop there and give you a moment to just share a little bit in your own words, just about who you are and kind of how you came to this work.
Hi. Well, thank you for having me. I'm so glad to have you here as a friend, and I feel honored and nervous and excited to share a little bit about what's been going on. So I guess a little bit about me is I relocated up to the North Country of New Hampshire, so above the Notch, the White Mountain region, about 6 years ago. Me and my husband bought our first home here, and, I'd worked the last 10 plus years in clinical care, working in crisis intervention and eating disorder, clinical care and mental health settings, treatment facilities, and doing that kind of work. And when we moved up here, we were trying to figure out ways to align everything. I like order, and I wanted to get out of clinical care, and I had a background in education, working in clinical supports in school settings. And I kind of jumped into that when we moved up here because it was familiar. And then I got into the food access stuff, which is how I met you, Erin, which was really cool. And tied in the nutrition piece through just meeting the basic needs of our local population by just providing some food, some nutrient dense local vegetables. I fell in love with the concept of gleaning. I put a lot of heart into that work that I did. And in doing that, I couldn't turn off my clinical brain. I was still observing. I was sort of data collecting. I was doing all these things I was sort of trying to dismantle within my own self. And I learned a lot about myself in that process as well, how I was observing myself, observing others, and where I was pathologizing, where I was lending to stigmatization. And then I kind of took a beat and got to know people, got to know patrons, got to know the volunteers, got to know the people that run the food bank and the different food access meals and little fridges and all these types of things up here. And I come from a background as well in floral work. That was my after school job when I was a kid. And I am still on the payroll at my local hometown flower shop way back from when I was 14. They're like family to me. I love flower work. I've been doing it throughout my time in academia and clinical care. It was sort of my old faithful type thing, and I was thinking in my time in food access, the flower piece is missing. We're bringing the food, we're bringing the veggies, we're bringing the herbs, and then Pantry Posies kind of came to be. So here we are.
Do you mind just defining what gleaning is for folks? Because I know some folks won't necessarily know what that means.
Sure. So that was a new concept to me until I started doing it. And it stems from biblical readings, biblical times, but it's the practice of collecting grown foods and distributing it to places that it may not go to in like a commercialized way. So, food pantries, food banks, neighbor sharing. It's basically sharing the excess of, so that it does not go to waste. So you can do that with food. You can do that with, as I'm learning now, flowers, herbs, vegetables, things like that.
So tell me a little bit more about the concept for pantry posies, because this, as I was saying before, this is like a novel thing that people don't have probably never encountered before, this idea. So I'd love to just to articulate it and also just like note that like you're still in the building phase of all of this. So it's like it's kind of a beautiful spot where not everything is perfectly figured out, but you're being guided by this like amazing inspiration.
Yes, yes. It's kind of this messy, beautiful like conundrum that's like just coming to be. So Pantry Posies sort of started mid-pandemic. I took a step back from gleaning vegetables and doing like 501 work. I just wanted to kind of like take a beat, think about my own work inside like I had that privilege to do that during COVID. And then I started growing flowers in my own yard. For the first time, I'm a very, very young green gardener. People ask, "Oh, are you a flower farmer? Let me come to your farm." It's like, no, I don't hold a candle, a sprinkle on a cupcake to what farmers do. So this is all new for me too. So because I love flowers and as a consumer of flowers in this new region that I am in and in the rural mountains, it's hard to access, even for those of us that have the privilege of being able to just toss dollars to get it. So I wanted to think of a way to make flowers more accessible to people. And so I was like, well, I'll grow more. Like I'll grow some. I have a lot of respect for folks up here that do growing as their livelihood, flower farmers, growers, food growers, CSA holders. I have so much respect for them. So I wanted to do something where that same type of product was accessible to more. And so I started growing in my yard and linking up with the food pantries that I had grown to know and grow a great rapport with in my gleaning work. And they were like, yeah, flowers would be great, and I kind of pitched this idea of working in more of the idea of like equitable and inclusive practices in the flower distribution and kind of modeling that with the flower access program. Because in my time with gleaning, I could see some of like the strong disparities in the community care of giving in food access. And, there's a difference between giving everybody a small piece of a pie versus giving them like the whole pie so their family can leisurely enjoy a dessert like their neighbors and friends are doing, so kind of looping in a little bit of the ideas of being more inclusive and more equitable and kind of having the pantry patrons themselves sort of tell me how they want things to roll. And then through that, in the last 2 years, we've kind of grown a reputation locally of like I'm the flower lady that gives the flowers away. And people love it. We provide tulips in late spring, early summer, and then we provide sunflowers, high summer or early fall, because we have that very short growing period here. So anything else that comes to be is sort of on my end an experiment, and I do put like my grit and my heart and my learning of all the information I'm soaking up about gardening into that process. And therefore, after, if there's excess, I can share that outward. So pantry patrons are always the priority first as the food, flower access, right? So, and then anything that's left over as stock at the end can be sold out to community members who have sort of been eyeballing it and wanting that and might have access to be able to go and privileged to shop weekly at a farmer's market to obtain a bouquet. But when it comes to pantry posies, they have to wait a little bit till we serve our patrons first, and then they get what's left. So,
which is like such a different kind of concept, I think, for a lot of consumers, because they're just like they're used to being treated with that kind of like priority.
With community care, it's more like it's really rooted in equitable practice, right? So like if you're a folk, like, a household that can weekly throw in a bouquet when they go to the grocery store, the pantry posy product isn't marketed towards that demographic. However, if someone in that demographic is like, ooh, I really do like that, I really do want that, sure, you can have it, but let me give it first to those that can't go shopping and buy it like that, or don't have the availability to get to and from the farmer's market, or to the farm to pick up a CSA or whatever. They get it first, and then, hang on 1 minute. which is also opposite of like, well, don't you want my, I get a lot of like, well, how much is it? I'll give you a good tip, or I'll come get it from you. No harm, no foul. You don't have to even design it or wrap it. Like the want for it, it's almost like it's self-marketing because it's not as readily available to those that could access it. And then for those who may not normally have access to it, there's almost this interesting, I've observed, like hesitation. It's a concept that's kind of new all around in a holistic way of like the first time I brought some flowers to a pantry to introduce myself after it had kind of already been piloted at this one spot where they kind of knew me. And I went into the next, a volunteer was like, well, you can't eat those, and it's like, well, the food pantry is for food. You're right about that. But I was like, we can feed hearts too. Right. And we can feed, some positivity and some sharing of love and compassion. And then, once people start to see what it does, then it's a little bit more accepted. But it's like kind of like backwards business.
Yeah. It's educational too. I think that's one of the things you and I have talked about before, is it helps to educate people.
So that's the hard piece for me is I love education. My background is rooted in that. I started my adult life as a educator, and I worked in integrated preschool with kids and life skills and home visits with parents. I always have loved to see like larger picture type things and kind of get down to the nitty gritty of things to try to problem solve. And I also learned how like pretentious that could come off sometimes too when you're trying to educate things that are like social issues, like equitable practices in food and flower access. Like I never want to knock down someone that's doing good work. At the end of the day, like if you're in a food pantry or if you're in a community meal setting and you're helping and you're a helper out there, I never want to like knock down the already broken legs of a helper. Because that's why we're here for this podcast, right? Is like how sometimes this work is so kick ass and it kicks our ass at the same time. So it's like, that can be tough, is sort of like projecting out education. So I started taking a step back, learning more about like the demographics of where I live, still utilizing that clinical mindset that I have that I'm still trying to deconstruct, but utilizing it in a way that felt more functional and observing kind of more where people were at, where their needs lie, talk to them, have conversation with them. Like, what are you getting at the food pantries this week? Is this enough to feed? Who's in your household? How many people? Are you responsible for others? Like, there's all these rules and regulations. Then we're also doing good work, right? So that doesn't always mean we're following all the rules because we want to help as much as we can. So sometimes we do spread ourselves and our resources thin. So like sort of educating on that regard too, like sometimes when we give a little in just maybe a different way than we're used to giving, that can also be more sustainable. So for me, growing flowers, giving flowers, that's something I know can bring joy. I have surveyed people in line. Majority would say, when you think of flowers, what do you think of? Why do you give flowers? Why do you get flowers? And it's usually joy or in celebration or in support. So I started thinking more of like connection and like people in food. Yes, they're hungry for nutrients, but like even as donors and even as the volunteers, we're all hungry for like connection. We're all hungry for like being nurtured and nourished in ways that we may not even realize. So where flowers cannot be eaten, they still provide some sort of nourishment. It shows how we could be more equitable and inclusive in our practices, just by simple little tweaks and utilizing things that are assets to us that we can share out in a resourceful way. For me, it's not hard to do that. This is a heck of a lot easier than crisis care intervention work. And I still get to meet people that can utilize those resources that may not even exist here regionally or exist in a truly equitable or inclusive way, that they can offer the true help to fill the need. Food pantries, we always say, like exist as like a stepping stone along the way, right? We don't want someone to have to only be reliant on the food pantries, because we hope that can help them, by them being fed, be the catalyst to help more pieces come together. But if they're not really fully being fed, so it's kind of teaching that too, is asking more of them and what they want, and reminding volunteers and all that these programs wouldn't exist if these folks didn't come, so.
I think it's this idea behind like everybody deserves dignity, everybody deserves beauty. Mm-hmm. And I almost think, I mean, you were on the crisis intervention side of things for a long time. This is a different kind of intervention. It might not be as acute in that moment, but I think that when folks, and this is certainly not the case universally, but when you're up against like hard times, I think a lot of people, when they're struggling, already feel dehumanized in a lot of ways. They
Yeah.
already feel shitty about themselves
Mm-hmm.
because our society that we live in, like, treats that's like what we're trained to feel like. If we're struggling, it's our own personal feeling, when we all know that that is complete and utter bullshit.
Mm-hmm.
It's there are these systemic forces at play that, are why people are struggling. And so I think being able to be reminded that we deserve beauty, even amidst the struggle, regardless of the struggle, that we deserve beauty because we are human beings that are deserving of that. Human beings are deserving of rest. These things aren't treats for ourselves.
Right.
These
Right.
things are part of our like basic human dignity, I guess.
Right, right, and that's interesting too that you said treat, like it's not a treat, because that's the exact phrase some would even say when I walk in the door with the flowers. What a treat! What a
Right.
treat! And I started thinking about that phrase a lot, and I reframed it a lot. That's one thing my husband always comments that I'm really good at is reframing to avoid. So I also use it in like education. I used to work with little kids. So reframing to say, what a delight, what joy, because those are words that you've put back out there in regards to how seeing these make you feel, and then we can get down to the nitty gritty of the science of it all, and like what being in the presence of flowers does to the human condition, like it tickles your sensory, your smells, and that is like your strongest connection to memories. And so I can't even tell you how many stories I've heard in the last just 2 years of doing this of people's connections to flowers in general, or a gardening story, or my mother this, or my great grandfather this, or I had these in my wedding, or, there's just a story. And so it brings connection. And with the flowers, they're for pantry patrons first, but when I bring them to the pantry, it's like a hands-off policy for me. There's no policing of flowers. It's like, I was in the preschool world, so I loathe the expression, you get what you get and you don't get upset. So there's none of that here. And if a donor comes and drops off whatever they want to contribute that week, and they see the bouquets and they want to grab one, I encourage them to, especially if they have this outward response, like, oh, whoa, there's
Mhm.
sunflowers today. And if they have a little kiddo in the car and the kid, points and they're invested in it, and it's like, oh, does that bring you joy? Aren't they beautiful? And, oh, they're so beautiful. And then I'll encourage them to take one. And then even the volunteers. And when people donate, like if people want to donate vegetables, I still can't shake the gleaning hat, right? So I have friends and neighbors who grow, and they want to leave baskets of vegetables from the garden on their steps. And so I'll take that, and then I'll leave a mason jar from something from the garden that week, as sort of that kind of also breaking down of giving and receiving, that you're putting this out there for them to eat. Here's a little slice of joy for you. Enjoy the beauty of that, because we all, like you had said, we all deserve that. We all deserve to have access. And especially when life is just mucky. Everyone goes through a hard time. So you never know. I've had people at the food pantry even tell me, like, I took that and gave it to someone else. And I just loved that. I love that because, there's so much stigma around those, struggling. And we add, like you said, it's already hard enough. And then as a society, we add moral value to being unable to meet our needs. And that just seems so ridiculous to me. And if anything can be learned through the pandemic, it's that, we're not all in that same cruise ship in the storm. And some of us can afford to throw a couple lifeboats over the edge. So I think that goes along with the idea of equitable practice too, is just showing that we all can benefit from that, whether we're in
Mhm.
a position to be giving or we're out there to be getting, because we need it right now.
It is hard right now. We need to be able to find whatever is going to bring us joy, is going to bring us comfort, going to bring us closer to community in so many different ways. You said it before, like we can't do this work, this hard work, this amazing work in the world without it like kicking our asses a little bit.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
It's like this shit is hard.
Yeah.
What is it about, like, where are you finding hope right now? Like, what is it about doing this work that is giving you hope or not? That's totally fine. You could say it's not giving you hope. That's that's a whole other conversation. But like, yeah, tell me more about that.
Well, there are those moments, and it's we're kind of in the thick of the I know this will be aired later, but
Mhm.
in the thick of the holiday season, so you're kind of almost pelted from all angles all these different messages, right? So you're kind of reminded of like the dialectics that is life. And I kind of allow myself to have like two all out emotional, just messiness responses to just like, oh, the humanity of it all, as a person. I allow myself a couple episodes of engaging in the misery of, why this, and I wish we could do more, and there's never enough food, and like, I grew 4,000 sunflowers, but why can't I grow 40,000? And, I just go through these moments, and then I think about other folks that are going through these kind of moments too, and where the privilege lies in that. And I try to think that I live my personal life guided by like a grateful heart. And so I try in my own practice for myself as Janie to, at the end of the day or the beginning of the next day, if I have fallen asleep on the couch and didn't get the chance to do that, process through like what the hardest part of my day was. Because even sometimes the hardest, like, I'm like, if that was the hardest part of my day, hashtag blessed, like, or if it's like something really hard, I can reach out to other helpers, that do work like this and check in. And even in doing that, just lending the ear in that kind of community sense, allowing them space to share some of their hardships, so you can connect on how common we are inside this human experience of, we often talk about filling buckets and draining wells and all these like poetic metaphors that we put on bumper stickers and stuff to like self-care ourselves. And I think when we work in this type of community care work, we recognize how big this all is. And sometimes it's not just self-care, it's community care. And we need to practice what we preach and find the community within us as helpers. And there's a lot of dismantling within this work too, is dismantling like savior syndrome and white supremac systemic things that are kind of rooted within us and our heritage and the why we're doing what we do. It's very humbling. I always say, like, if people say you must be so proud of yourself, I've been hearing that a lot lately. Like you've got to be so proud. And it's like, at the end of the day, I do drive. I'm a crier, and I drive away from a lot of the work, like with tears. And it's happy tears, it's angry tears, it's sad tears, it's bittersweet tears, it's awareness tears. Sometimes it's a big kick in the butt to me, like, girlfriend, like, open your eyeballs a little bit. These are your neighbors, these are your friends, like, and in sharing the flowers and having that connection and being the flower lady and sharing the recipes for the fresh veggies, you build rapport, and so folks tend to share more. And I had that clinical history, and so I do have training in how to draw those boundaries. You're still a person, at the end of the day, you still give little pieces of your heart, into the work that you do. So I think it's important to take care, but and also recognize, just as we do in those in the community that are attending the pantry, whether they're going for provisions or they're providing, that we all have needs, and recognizing that we're human inside of it too. And if we need to take that beat, it's okay. Like, that's where you take off the savior hat and you're like, there's going to be people hungry for food and flour always. So if you have to take a beat or tag someone in, that's the hard part too, with building momentum and growing programs like this, is the demand for more food pantries want to get looped in, more. And it's like, whoa. We're still, like you said, this is new. This is infancy. This is like the seed is not even popping out yet. This is like barely germinating. But it's rooted. I feel it. It has some strong roots, and it's emerging. And this is so metaphorical and poetic, but like, I just, I think that when you think about it like that too, and you take those moments to see how little we are and how big things are and how universal things can be, but also how individual we all are, and you think about equity, it helps you stay centered into why you're doing what you're doing. And so when it gets exhausting, you can even Google those kinds of concepts and just read other people that have ideas around that, just to be like, okay, cool, I'm not the only one. Take a beat, like, calm yourself down there, Janie.
I think it's real. It's like finding those places where you can, because like sustaining hope, sustaining yourself is not easy in this moment. It's like sustainability is one of those things I have to talk to people about it all the time, in all sorts of different contexts of sustainability, of like personal sustainability, like financial sustainability, environmental sustainability, all of those different bits and pieces. I'm also like one of the worst with that, and like struggle so hard myself to be like, oh, it's time to take a break, until I kind of like get sidelined for a couple of days. And then I'm like, all right, nope, I was not listening to my own cues around all of that. One of the things that you talked about is about this, the white savior, the saviorism kind of aspect of this. I'd love to hear just from your background in either maybe food access or clinical work, or just what is that? How does that show up in this work?
White savior syndrome certainly does pop up within myself, within the culture, and it's hard. And I am fortunate to have patient and generous friends who have conversations with me that can be hard at times, that are like, whoa, girl, rein it in. You're not like Candace Cameron in the Hallmark movie going to save the small town folk, and the North Country folk will tell you, they'll kick you in your britches. They'll be like, step back. They tell me more than, and that's, I believe that too in psych work. And that's also something that stems from white supremacy too, is the patient always knows best. The client always knows best. And I believe that. And culturally in that clinical world, that's not always the case. So even modeling that, in the food pantries for the people that volunteer there, is giving the patrons a sense of choice. It's not this, you get what you get and you don't get upset. Maybe they're already upset. They're already in a state of such upset, like, let's not add it more. If they want 2 of this, and, you don't know what they've got going on, and then you got learning too, and educating too about bigger concepts like scarcity mindset and why people hoard or take extra, and not stigmatizing that, but not letting that white suprematic gross ideology of control take over and trying to like derail someone from doing the good work. So it's this weird, so my whole thing is that I just hear like my dad's voice in my head that's like, do to yourself what you want to do to others, like work on that. And when you're working it shines out, others might see it in play and say, oh, okay, maybe if I step back a little bit and acknowledge this and work on this, but there is this talk about a lot of self-care after, because you're also met with opposing ideologies.
One of the things that I heard you say is just, which I'm like really appreciate you said this, is that you're also working on dismantling some of those things for yourself too, and kind of like challenging some of your own and that's it. So much of this is like, it's a reaction. Like we're reacting to things in a way that we've been conditioned culturally. One of the things I say on this podcast is that we have to cultivate the inner conditions to create the outer change, which is a saying from my my master's program. I think that what happens when we only look outside and don't tend to within is that we miss the mindset part of things. We miss the embodiment part of things. Those are the things that actually move systems change, create system change, create social change, is tending to mindsets. But it's so much easier to look outside and be like, oh, here, we're going to do X, Y, Z, and that's going to be sufficient and good enough for creating change in the world or creating impact of whatever. It's always like frustrates me, and you probably hear this too, like you've seen this in the gleaning world for sure and in your work, where it's like, oh cool, we moved this amount of food. Okay, but like how much of that was good quality food? How much of that was like the food that like does touch people's hearts, and nourishes people's souls, like the birthday cake, you know what I mean? Like how much of that is actually what happened? We get so hung up, and that's such a white supremacy culture thing, is like we get so hung up on metrics. Because metrics are like an outward facing kind of indication of like how well we're doing, and the impact we're having, versus kind of starting to shift and understand like, well, what's that quality part of things, which is still an impact part of things, but it is indicative of a mindset shift at the same time.
Yes. Yeah. And it's hard to document so many anecdotal type engagements of how equitable practice actually has success, because this is the other piece people don't talk about, is like there's so many rules and regulations to the systems as they are. So it's inside food access, there's still rules and regulations. You still have to meet certain requirements to be eligible to receive, and I can't tell you, and this is what good people do when they're making good trouble, is the rules don't always apply. And so there's so much data that's not being collected, because we're siphoning resources out on the DL, because there's this huge wave of folks that don't fall within parameters of things. And so is that sustainable? If we're looking at it, I mean, we just talked about that being like a white savior, white supremacy kind of ideology of numbering it all out, but it's tricky to try to see, like, when we talk about equity, we want to talk about is what we're doing enough, and in the right avenues of lending enough care in a fruitful way. Like, it's one thing to bring a ho-ho to share with the entire class of 25 kids, you know what I mean? But wouldn't it be great if each kid could have their own treat? Like, that's, but down to the nitty gritty of things, of asking the patrons and the recipients and the clients, who at any moment of any day could be any one of us, what their needs are and what we can do to fill it. And it seems so simple. And yet so many things get in the way, so many things. And a lot of it is the systemic stuff and the moral value that we attach to things. And then, what we project out there as a helper, and what somebody that's going to ask or going to receive has to carry. There's a lot there, and there's great teachable moments for sure, and there's connections to be made. And that's what I love the most about all this is, we can never do enough of it.
Yeah, that's super, super true. It's an ongoing thing. And there's like a bit of peace that has to be made too, recognizing that this is generational work. This is not something that we solve overnight. And yeah, I have to make peace with that all the time, because I'm just like, I can get lost in the hopelessness and the despair of it all, and being like, there's so much to fucking fix.
Yeah.
Like, fuck, what the, oh no. Like, and that's like super real. And I can't, and that's one of the things I see things like what you're doing, like, gives me hope, because I'm just like, well, this is like the coolest fucking thing. And you're building something so real and born out of a need that, and a demand. And there's like these incredible ripple effects that come as part of this, because as we talked about before, it's like, it's the simple act of like providing the flowers, for sure. That's like one piece of this. But through that, you are creating all of this education. You are setting a precedent that like people deserve this, no matter their circumstances. And I think that that's just so very, very powerful. And I'd love to hear you talk about what it's like to, you were talking about it being such a, like, this messy, beautiful thing that you're building. Talk to me about like what it feels like to build a messy, beautiful thing.
For me, it's hard because I like order and cleanliness, and even doing messy things, I've been like praised for how orderly you are, and doing it. And so those are things I've had to dismantle within my own self, the perfectionism and all that kind of bull, because sometimes you can plan, and nature does what the hell she wants, and flowers for me, I love them so much. And I've learned a lot in relocating up to the North Country. These were part of my life since I was 14 years old. And not from a place where I was able to buy and shop and put them on my table, but I sold them as my livelihood to be able to pay for my college. And, I came from a big family. So there was a lot of, you want the basic things, you get a job so you can buy them. And I saw all the different ways from an early age, how different a part flowers played in people's lives. And I lived in a small town, so I knew people that were coming in and ordering flowers for the kids for prom, and how excited that it was. And I saw, people coming in and doing the flowers for the graduations and the dance recitals. But then you also saw, like, my very first day, I'll never forget this, working in the flower world. I had to deliver funeral flowers to a service, to a wake. And I had to put a corsage on the deceased. And I was like, this is hazing. Like, this can't be real. But this is part of the job, is flowers. And this was what was explained to me the very first day, is flowers are a celebration for all things. Hard, soft, secretary's day or whatever, office administration day, I think, all the way to wakes, to dances, to I'm sorry's, to sympathy, to get well, and so when I work with flowers, for me, it is a messy thing in general, because I am a Cancer and I have a very emotional person, and I do cry. My family has called me the crier. I cry in all emotions: anger, sad, happy. When things are beautiful, I've learned in my own life to slow down and notice that. I used to be a very busy bee working in clinical care, doing crisis intervention. I'm proud of the work that I have done. And also I see so much room for change within my own self of what I've put out there. And I've been able to receive back feedback of harm even that I've caused in the work that I've done, and did some true soul searching, and that's why I stepped away from clinical care work. I like the human connection piece that's a little bit deeper than the clinical, than the just othering, than the lumping. I love that. That's what creates a mess for me, is making sure that I'm utilizing those boundaries that I've learned to apply in clinical settings while still reminding myself that we're all part of this human experience at the same time. And when people thank me for flowers, it brings out a weird feeling. Like, I oftentimes, and it's not like the social awkwardness that is me, I will say back, no, thank you. Like, thank you for giving me the reminder that these needed to be here. Like, from seed to homes, to cars, to bedside tables, to wherever. Some of these folks bring them to graves, like, just to be able to provide that too. That's also messy, and then hearing all the stories and holding the space for those stories, and knowing where to draw the line, where that capacity is beyond, and I'm not in a place to hold right now. That's hard for me. That's messy for me of drawing those boundaries, of saying, no, I'm so sorry, I'll catch you next week, and then hope when you drive away that they show up next week, or that they have an okay week, or that they're fed, or, so that is messy. And then just the messiness of what it is. Like, people think in general, flower, like, always I'd love to work in a flower shop. I love this. And I don't think there's recognition for many occupations that present to be beautiful or pretty. What the end result is, the product, what they don't always understand. We don't always understand when we're doing it, even what the process is that leads up to this product. And flower work, like, Erin, I know what you and I talked recently about, how, like, I'm like, no, it has to be ethical, because there's so much gnarliness in flower work that people don't even know about, that we don't even have an extra hour to get into. But just recognizing, like, even with my own self, that, like, the messiness is all part of the human experience. And, like, I've even gone from, clinical me in a cute little blazer, with heels, and kind of dictating outwardly, which is what we kind of do in a clinical way, which is so weird to me, to now showing up to places with dirt on my pants and on my shirt, and smelling like manure and dirty nails, and bringing really beautiful vegetables. Like you had said, weeding out the junk and educating on that piece too, of, we want to keep dignity at the core of things too. And we're not providing pig slop to others. Like, when we teach children, we're not like, let's clean out what we don't want anymore and give it to someone else. It's like recognizing within ourselves our capacity, when we've had enough and when we can share it out. And, like, that seems so easy too, right? All of this seems so easy, but there's these bigger pieces that get in the way and make it super messy. So it's pretty loaded, and I like to think big picture, and nothing is easy and simple for me. So it fits, and I love it.
I love that too. I'm just so glad you're doing it, because this is so important.
Yeah.
One of the things you were talking about, as I was, just that kind of resonated for me, is just like that flowers show up in so many different times in our lives.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, one of the biggest, like, most powerful things I could do for myself when I was going through my divorce, which was like absolute hell, was to buy myself flowers. Mm. And I just remember, like, I never really had a lot of flowers during my marriage. That was never something that, like, it was considered frivolous a lot of times to to buy flowers for oneself. And it was so very, very important for me to have, fresh flowers, like usually probably every couple of weeks. So probably wasn't every week. And in order to really just kind of brighten up my space, brighten up my heart at that moment in time, bring that beauty into my space, because that beauty in and of itself gave me hope. Just to say, like, there are beautiful things that bloom that come from the darkness oftentimes, and like, and feeling like invested in that as I move forward. And so it just made me think about that, because I got a little bit emotional. It's real.
Flowers can do that. And they do that. They bring out memories, and they bring out, and hard stuff too. And that's where I think I get to wear my little piece of that clinical hat, but still be on that human level where I do hold time for parking lot chit chat. So if people are waiting in pantry lines, and some folks will seek me out and they've been dying to offload something, and it could be the most simple thing. And you can offer a resource, that helps with burnout too, is you can link others into resources and remind them of what their own capacities are. And that's really cool. Even to the point where someone might be having a hard time. This was so sweet. There was like one bouquet left. No one ever wants to take the last of anything, right? And there was a gal in line that seemed to have been struggling, having a tough time. Couple kids with her, kind of pulling her in all different directions. And it's COVID, so trying to keep the social distance and the masks on the littles. It's just hard. And I saw an older gentleman reach down and pick up the bouquet and just go hand it to her. And I was like, you make sure you take this home this week. I think you could have this. And I was like, that's so sweet, because that's really what this is all about, is recognizing what our own capacities are and where and how we can share it out. And that's being modeled in this flower program, and what we can give of ourselves to truly fill the needs of others, and not just sort of like skimping out. I want everyone to have mashed potatoes and gravy if that's what they want. You said it seemed frivolous to you in your marriage to spend that money. And a lot of folks, even when I was working in the flower shop, not able to even buy and bring home my own flowers, I idolized people that did, the shop owners that got the weekly deliveries, and the women whose husbands, frivolously, had that money to spend. And to me, it was always like, is this wasteful? Is this jealousy? What is this feeling that I have? And I always thought, like, I don't deserve that. That's why that doesn't come my way, or like as young women, like we could get into like patriarchy bullshit too, but like, we're kind of almost taught at this early age that a Prince Charming will come and give us the dozen red roses, whether we like red roses or not. Like, he's not even going to ask us if we prefer sunflowers or lilies, and we're going to love those red roses because that is so romantic. And like, so we almost condition like the giving of flowers. So it's almost like deconstructing all of this. And,
right.
And it is tough. Like, even in the world of the people I admire in the flower business are like, oh Lordy, why are you doing this? I don't know what the job stability is in it, but I think there is sustainability in bringing joy and the reminder that we are very tiny in this huge world, and that even when there's darkness and muck, there's some hope, and there is some need for care.
And those seeds are planted.
The seeds are planted, and the roots are strong, baby.
Mm-hmm. I love it. Janie, just thank you so very much for all of this. This is has just completely warmed my heart, and I am so very honored that I get to know you and to get to see you on this journey and get to just be in relationship with you. It makes me so very happy.
Thank you so much. I just love that you're even doing this, because I'm so looking forward to listening to the season and just discovering other people that you think are rad that do cool things, because at the end of the day, this is what all of it is about, is community and connection. And that's what I'm looking forward to too, because I'm like, I might be able to listen to this and hear some other cool people's stories and get my jive going for next time. And that's really cool. So thank you for even giving me the opportunity to do this. It's really awesome. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you to Janie Arquitt for joining me in conversation today. If you want to learn more about her work, you can check out pantryposies.com or follow Pantry Posies on Facebook or Instagram. If you enjoyed this conversation, please leave a 5-star rating and review to help us reach more people. Make sure to follow Rise and Rouse wherever you listen to podcasts so you never miss your chance to hear from someone who gives a damn. Follow us on Instagram at Rise and Rouse, and sign up for my newsletter by going to allgoodstrategies.com. Rise and Rouse is created and hosted by me, Erin Allgood. It is produced and edited by Steph George of Stefania Audio. Production support from Grace Cleary-Morin and Jana Krizanova. Our theme music is written and produced by Chris Marion. Thank you so much. We'll see you next week.